is the first of three, I believe. Is that correct, Bert? Of three lectures that I'm going to give, or learnings that we're going to do relating to the issue of disabilities, which is an issue that is, very personal for me and my wife, and one that we've also really brought into the context of the yeshiva in terms of doing a full week every other year, a fully immersive week, training our students relating to disabilities. A piece of that is halacha, piece of it, but a lot of it is we bring in panels. They should hear from people directly about what the realities are. We bring in experts thinking about the communal issues and so on. My area of focus tends to be halacha or Torah more broadly, but halacha more specifically. So a lot of the, what we'll be looking at is halachic issues. But what I want to say is that while there are serious halachic issues that have to be addressed, I don't think that that's our biggest challenge in the Orthodox community when it comes to disabilities. I think that the biggest issues are communal ones in terms of us, prioritizing it and giving it the attention and the money and the effort that it needs. I'll just say that my two boys, Kasriel and Natano, who are now men, 27, 29 years old, and Baruch Hashem, they're doing quite well. They both are on the spectrum and have particularly, social emotional challenges. And, those are also different than, let's say, physical disabilities. Those are, I wrote an article, Dvor really wrote it, I just added a few things. But anyway, many years ago in the Jewish Week, when that was still a print newspaper, which was called Invisible, I forget what it was called, but it was something about our kids with invisible disabilities and they're being completely left out. Because, if somebody sees someone, I'm not sure where we fully need to be in the physical disabilities area either. But, if somebody sees somebody with a, like that's in a wheelchair or has other physical disabilities, and they come to shul, let's say, or school, there might immediately be like a sense of okay, how do we figure this out? How are we going to make this work? And so on. For my boys, it didn't work for them to be in school and shul because, the whole setup wasn't right for them. And so nobody is seeing that they're not there. They can see somebody who is there and something that needs to be addressed, but nobody was sort of seeing who wasn't there. And in the context of school, it creates challenges in terms of the dynamics of the classroom and all these other types of things. So, it was very sad, but we really did not have much of a shul for our kids. And we had to bring them, send them to a special needs, non-Jewish school. Things have gotten somewhat better in the recent years, but still we've got a long ways to go. So just as a way of saying that we're going to be looking at Torah and halachic sources, but there's a lot we have to do at the communal level. But some of the importance of looking at some of these sources is also to understand what types of Torah models do we have, or what types of ways of thinking about this do we have, besides just addressing particular challenges. Can you use a wheelchair on Shabbos? Can you use an iPad if you have to do X, Y, and Z, because of this type of thing? Those types of questions. But where do we see more in terms of the mandate and the sense of obligation around there, or models that we can use to be thinking about it? So that's what I want to look at today, and probably next week as well, and maybe the third week. Bert, are we doing 3? Is that correct?
Yes, God willing. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe the third week we can look at a specific, more narrow halachic issue. I'll just say one other word of introduction, though, about that, which is that, we do a kolo for psak in the summer for our rabbis in the field. We bring them in from all over, and they learn with us for 2 weeks, and they work on halachic issues that are urgent for them in their communities, and they write tshuvot, and then they go and they bring them back out to their communities. And and this year, and that's actually what I'm doing in Israel as well, because we're doing that for 2 weeks here after we did the 2 weeks in New York. We're doing it for 2 weeks here for our rabbis and rabbaniyot in Rikma, which is a program that we have for training Israeli rabbis and rabbaniyot who are already in the field but never really got pastoral training, rabbinic training, and so on. So we're doing this here as well. And I should just say that in the U.S. version of it, we said, in previous years, we would sometimes have a theme. Actually, the very first year, the theme was disability. disabilities. But this year, we said, we're not going to do anything. Just bring the things that's most urgent for you in your community. And nevertheless, two of the tshuva wound up being in this area. One tshuva was about how a deaf person is supposed to daven. That often the sort of instruction sock that deaf people get is, just say it, you have to halachically to daven, it has to be audible. So not audible by you, but audible, you have to come out of your lips. So say it even if it's not so coherent, but that's how you have to daven. And the point is that that's like so taxing, so exhausting, so not meaningful. So then some people will say, well, just sign the davening. But then the signing also, the grammar doesn't translate, and it's just very taxing. And so somebody wanted to sort of like write a tshuva about how to do it. But what I think was profound was that not the halachic issues that he laid out. What was profound was the facts that he was sharing with me that I was completely unaware of. The facts that, it's not just saying just sign it. That doesn't work for deaf people. Like he said, first of all, imagine the bracha, Gila Rina Ditza V'chedva. He says, if you were signing that, you would just do like this 5 times, Those words are all the same word in sign language. And just realizing that reality and realizing that the halachic instruction and guidance that they're getting is so not right and so doesn't understand what the reality is and that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. That was just extremely profound on its own terms. And how often is that the Jewish community, poskim, whatever, anybody is just projecting their own reality, and not really appreciating it. And I should say the other tshuva, by the way, was about somebody who was blind reading from the Sefer Torah, but having a braille text there. So the Sefer Torah would be open in front of them, but could they read it off of the braille text? So it was just fascinating that 2 of the questions that came up without any theme were on this topic. Okay, so that's all in ways of introduction about why this is so personal and meaningful for me. And what we're going to do is we're going to start by looking at one tshuva. And if we get through this in the 50 minutes, then we can move on to something else. And not even a full tshuva. But this is a tshuva written by the Mases Binyamin. You see the little bio there. Is this okay, or should I make it a little bigger? Anybody? Is this good? Good?
Bigger.
Bigger?
Bigger if you can.
Oh, okay, very
Oh,
good.
good.
That's good? Okay.
Much better.
So Benjamin Aaron ben Rav Avram Solonik lived in Poland, 16th century, and he was a student of the Ramah, Rav Moshe Isserlis, who was the glosses on the Shulchan Aruch, which is sort of the guidance for the Ashkenazim. And this is what I really want to do is we're not really going to get so into the halachic issues. What really is so powerful about this is the way he frames it, both at the beginning and at the end. And his question was, can you give an aliyah? Can a blind man receive an aliyah? So this is the less radical version of what I was saying a minute ago, which is, can a blind person read from the Torah? They're not actually reading, there's a Torah open, but they're reading the Braille. This is an easier question. This is the question of, can a blind person, can the Baal Koreh read from the Torah, but you just give the blind person, the aliyah, right? You let them be the one that comes up and makes the brachot. So what is the question here, just to sort of frame what halachic issue at stake is? Well, the halachic issue at stake is, what is the nature of the, hold on one second, I just got to adjust my earbuds right now. They're just causing me a little bit of trying to figure out what's going on. Hold on. Am I coming across okay?
Yes.
I can hear you fine.
Okay.
I'm going to go, but I'm going to get my
I'm
hearing.
going to take off one earbud. Is this still okay? Just as good?
Yes.
Okay, good. All right. So the halachic issues are as follows. It is really as follows. According to the Gemara, there was only a bracha at the beginning of the Kriyas Torah. The first guy who got the aliyah made the bracha, and the last guy who got the last aliyah made the final bracha. Nobody in the middle made a bracha. And also, when you got an aliyah, you were expected to read, right? I mean, not expected. That was what you did. You got called up and you read. what happened is, and some people might know, that is still the practice in some Sephardi communities, I think in some Taimani communities, and we have a Sephardi minion at the HIR, and, and they don't require you to read, but they want you to read. If you can't, then the Baal Koreh will read. But in the Ashkenazi communities, what developed was a practice of, look, not everybody knows how to read. It's embarrassing for those who don't. So what we're going to do is we'll just have a fixed Baal Koreh. Okay, and the fixed Baal Koreh will read, and the Ola will just make the brachot. And then it also evolved that you make the brachot before and the after each aliyah, not just at the beginning and at the end. That's really not as relevant for us. So that's the basic practice in the Ashkenazi community. In the Sephardi community, as I said, some really insist that the Ola gets the aliyah. And others, will sort of say, okay, fine, you can read alongside the Baal Koreh, but this is the ruling of the Shulchan Aruch, who is, represented the Sephardi tradition. But you have to make sure to say it out loud, and you, the person getting the aliyah, so you can hear what you're saying, because ultimately you really are supposed to be the Baal Koreh. So you have to say it audibly, and you have to read alongside the Baal Koreh. That's sort of the approach of, of the Shulchan Aruch and the Sephardim. But again, the Ashkenazim, even though they ideally say that, they really split up the jobs between the Baal Koreh and the Ola. That's like the Ashkenazi approach. Sorry, I just need to tell a story before I go on, which is just a funny illustration of this. So Rav Avi was, his father, Alav Shalom, used to be a rabbi here in Israel, and of like a Moshav, and Avi would say, Avi's a Kohen, of course, and he would say that when he was, whenever he would come to Israel, they would go to a, this like Taimani shul, and, they give him an aliyah because he's a Kohen. And then, it happened, they gave him an aliyah, and then everybody was quiet. They were waiting for him to read. So he's like, he said, I didn't know anything. He said, I sort of somehow, mumbled my way through it. Then he said, the next time I went, went to Israel, I came prepared. And I had studied I learned the aliyah ahead of time. So they called me up, Yamot, whatever, Avram ben Moshe Cohen, so gets up, he says, I read it, I did a great job. Gabbai looks around, says, Ein kan Levi, Yamot bimkom Levi. All right, so anyway, all right, for those that didn't get that, you got to go ahead and now read the Levi aliyah without having known it. Anyway, that's if you find yourself in a Sephardi show. Okay, but anyway, but to Ashkenazim, it's different. So what is the question, the halachic question about a blind person reading an aliyah? The halachic question really boils down to how do we see the separate roles here, right? Do we see that they're really completely separate? One guy's job is to make the brachas. The other guy's job is to read. All right, if you say that, then, why can't a blind person get an aliyah? But if you say that in principle, the other approach is the correct one, and that you have to read along with the Baal Koreh because you really are the person who's reading, or even if you don't have to verbally read along, it's based on the principle of, Shomea Ka'ona, listening is like you did it. Can that work if you're not able to do it yourself? If you're not looking at the text yourself and reading the text alongside, or if you are piggybacking on the Baal Koreh, but not yourself able to do it, can that actually work? And that's the question, whether a blind person can get an aliyah or not. The Shulchan Aruch rules that he cannot, because very much emphasizing the need of the Ola to read, and the Ramah rules that he can. And, that is definitely the widespread practice nowadays, even in Sephardi, shows that is the practice. Okay. So that's the background. Now we're going to look at this tshuva from the Masis Binyamin. Again, a student of the Ramah, so at some level the Ramah had already written his comments. But but just the idea that the Ramah's comments on the Shulchan Aruch became totally authoritative in the Ashkenazi community, that did not happen right away. So even though the Ramah, wrote these comments, here a student of the Ramah felt a need to address this question. Okay, and what I really want to focus on, like I said, is less the halachic argument and more the framing. So let's take a look at what he writes. So you'll hear the rhyme. It's a poem. Okay. if great people and many great people have already, investigated this matter, took the weight of the beam on their shoulders, like really, already, it's like well-trodden ground. Everybody is like, like there's a whirlwind around everybody. So meaning everybody's really has deeply invested in exploring this issue. Some permit and some forbid. Whether a blind person can be called up to read from the Torah. And the one who gathers all the camps together, the Am Kodesh, he's like leads all of the Jewish people. Okay, is Rav Yosef Cairo, Rav Yosef Shalom. In the Beit Yosef, his commentary on the Torah, he gathered all of the previous opinions, and and the way and the power of what he did, right? The reason we follow the Shulchan Aruch, one of the reasons is not just, Rav Yosef Cairo was a great posek. There were many great poskim before him and after him, and even greater poskim at his time. Part of it is because he is presenting his ruling as the distillation or the consensus that arises from all those that preceded him. And that's what he does in the Beis Yosef. He gathers up all the opinions and he weighs them and assesses them and then decides, here's the bottom line conclusion that emerges. So the Kate Basaf he gathered up all of the different opinions, and he weighed them and assessed them, and he concluded that it's forbidden. That he cannot get an aliyah amongst those who are counted. So I wanted to say something about that term, about bein haminuyim, because I really think that like the phrases here are very powerful and well chosen. Among those who are counted. Now, to some degree, that goes back to the famous line in, the Gemara in Megillah that speaks about who can count leminyan shiva, to the number of 7. And a line that's a lot discussed nowadays is the one about hakol olim leminyan shiva afilu isha afilu katan, right? And all count to the 7, even a woman, even a minor, but a woman should it because of kavod hatzibur. I assume that text is known to you. Anyway, so bein haminuyim literally just means among those that were counting up to 7, but I think he's saying something else as well, which is like the question of when you're not included, do you count? Like, do you matter? And if you cannot get an aliyah amongst those who are counted, then what sort of message is that selling you about whether you really count and whether you really matter? This happens to women a lot, if they're like, woman's in the, coming to a show, maybe she's in a psychotic, maybe whatever, she's coming to a show, and she's there, and there are 9 men, and they're waiting to get started because she's not being counted. Right. And that can feel very, alienating and very much like I don't matter. I don't count. So anyway, so he says, so that is how the Beit Yosef concluded. But I think already we're getting a sense of what's at stake. And now we're going to get to the next line, which really starts showing why he cares about this so much. So this is now the beginning of the next paragraph. But I said, even if the spirit of the ruler rises up against you, even if a great authority says something, do not abandon your place. Like you have to be true to your truth. It doesn't matter how great of an authority says otherwise. Because it should never be abandoned, or a person should never be abandoned. So already that sense of if somebody is left out, the sense of abandonment, cast off forever. Okay, that's actually just read it from Eicha. And from the time of Moshe Rabbeinu, that's a Gemara term for Moshe Rabbeinu, HaTorah b'keren zavit munach. The Torah is in a corner, is placed in a corner. Kol harotzeh yavo v'yito. Anybody who wants can come and take it. So this is alluding to a Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. The Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, also repeated by Rambam, says, there are 3 crowns that were given to Yisrael: the crown of kingship, the crown of kahuna, and the crown of Torah. The crown of kingship was for David and his descendants. The crown of Kahuna was for Aaron and his descendants, but the crown of Torah is like is sitting and waiting for anyone to come and take it. Torah is accessible to all, and anybody can rise to the highest heights of Torah. Which, by the way, is just as an aside, why I think that what's behind that ruling of that women and minors can get aliyot. Like, why? We always immediately run to the discussion of, does kavod tzibur apply nowadays, etc. But what's the reason for that ruling? Let's start with that. Obviously, if you have to spell out that women and minors, it means the default assumption was not that way. And I think that it's basically saying that Torah is fundamentally supposed to be accessible to everybody. It's also the model of Hakel, right? Which is Anashim, Nashim, V'tas, right? And Maimed Har Sinai, it's for everybody. All right, so Torah is supposed to be accessible to everybody. And even one mitzvah should not be like nullified. Okay, so you could say, well, what's the big deal? He doesn't get an aliyah, And he says, no, you don't understand. What does that say? Sometimes this is exactly the problem that sometimes rabbis have, which is they don't deeply appreciate, like that story I told you at the beginning, about davening if you're deaf, don't deeply appreciate what the real experience is for somebody that is excluded. All right. I remember I was once giving a talk, not a choveh, at a different place, but it was like people in sort of a smicha, post-smicha program anyway, and was about whether a Kohen can do Birchas Kohanim from a wheelchair. Now, the halacha on the face of it is no, because you have to be standing to do Birchas Kohanim. But I got this whole discussion about different ways you could, understand that, and why you could argue that a Kohen could do it. Anyway, one person gets up and says, understand what the big deal is. So, Birchas Kohanim, I'm not a Kohen, I never do Birchas Kohanim. Why do you have to do these halachic somersaults? So I said, oh my God. And say, well, now I understand why this guy is not a choveh. But anyway, but it's like it shows a real complete lack of empathy. Here is somebody that the rest of the world is telling them they're not the person they used to be. They're in a wheelchair, they're older, they don't have mobility. Mobility is so important for a sense of autonomy and agency and all of those things. And this person cannot, in practical ways, do a lot of things. Clearly, he's getting that message from society. And now he's a Kohen, though, and he can come and there's nothing stopping him from doing Birchas Kohanim. There's nothing that makes it physically not possible. And he can actually have an opportunity of status to actually be the Kohen that gives the bracha to the people. And now we're going to tell him you can't do it, right? So the one thing that maybe he actually could have done. So again, it's a problem of lack of appreciation where somebody is coming from and and how sensitive they might be to exclusion and what exclusion can mean. So I think already in the opening here, I'll just say one more sentence, just one more sentence. So I think in the opening here about the words like lo yiznach should not be abandoned or cast off forever, right? And mitzvah achat lo yivatel means don't tell me, it's just an aliyah, big deal. You don't get an aliyah, so what? No, even one mitzvah is important, and we have to really think about what the costs are of this and what the consequences are of this. Yes. Now, Bert, what did you want to say?
I thought Rav Avi, at the Bayit, has people in wheelchairs do Birchas Kohanim. Is that correct? I don't remember.
Yes, he does. And right now, where I'm staying this month is right near Ramban Shul, and Rav Benny Lau, although he's no longer at Ramban Shul, and he wrote a tshuva about that. So yes, there are definitely shows in which Kohanim do it. Yes, that is absolutely correct. Okay.
I assume you've had discussions with him about it. He's discussed.
Yeah, well, no, I'm all in favor. That was the presentation I was doing. Okay. So that's just showing the empathy. Now we're going to find out why. Yes, Tova. Tova, you have your hand raised. Oh, that's not Tova. Is that Dina? Your thing says Tova.
Can I just say something?
Yes.
We just fasted a whole day, 24 hours on Tisha.
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
Yes, it is. 25, actually.
Two Beit HaMikdash were destroyed,
Right,
part of it is because of how we treat other people.
right,
I don't even see that there's any issue. I'm very, it's really, I'm reacting very strongly to this because the worst thing that you could do is exclude somebody else and make someone uncomfortable
absolutely.
and exclude someone. And I wouldn't even make it an issue. There's a
Right,
story that the rabbi once said that someone couldn't speak Hebrew and he came into a shul and he started saying some kind of gibberish, but with such kavanah that he was elevated more than the other people in the synagogue. I
right.
don't understand why,
Right. So what you're speaking about is, so first of all, I mean, I really appreciate that. And it's, you're right. Like from a ethical point of view, it should be like, what is even the conversation here? And I fully agree with that. The sad part is two parts. Number one, not everybody shares your sensitivities, and that's a real problem. And number two, it's the halachic discourse, which is, how do we navigate the halachic? Sometimes halacha, not that halacha is coming to exclude a blind person, but the halacha is thinking about able-bodied people, and the halacha is saying you have to read from a Sefer Torah. So, and it just so happens that a blind person can't do that act of reading from a Sefer Torah. So, so the question is, even somebody that comes from your perspective might say, of course you're right, communally, institutionally, whatever, but what can I do? The halacha says otherwise, and then you have to find somebody that the posek who's going to understand, and that's why we're reading this, that if you have the right empathy, you've got to figure out a path through the halacha, as opposed to people that don't want to push and try to find a path. They wanted to say, well, the simple halacha is this. We shouldn't stretch it, So that's exactly the point why we're reading this Juva, to see somebody that articulates that. Okay. All right. But thank you for that. All right. So now he says like this, and now we're going to find out why he has so much empathy for this, why he's expressing the empathy also. He says, Kizeh ata, because now, here's what I mean, Kizeh ata, la'et ziknati, now that I have grown old, chashku haraot ba'arubot, the lights have dimmed in the skylight, in the windows. Okay, so my sight is failing. Okay, or I have become blind, or my sight is failing, and I can no longer see, or I can't see well. And based on what the thought that occurred, to the Beis Yosef, I'll be driven away from finding refuge in God's inheritance. I'll be driven away from my place in Torah. That I won't be counted among, and again, notice that mispar haminuyim, those that are counted. I won't be counted amongst those who are counted to get an aliyah. So what we have here is really surprising, that a posek is not only laying out for you why he thinks this is so important and where he wants to go, but he's also laying out why this is personally relevant for him, why he is what we would call nogea b'davar. He's got an actual interest in this, okay? And you might think if you have an interest in it, you're not going to be objective, but the sad reality is that people that don't have personal connections often don't really understand and feel the weight and feel the consequence of what they're doing. For them, it's all just like very technical, this halacha, that, this and that, okay? All right, so you don't get an aliyah, no big deal, we have to follow halacha. Sometimes you need the personal connection to understand how deep this is going to impact somebody. And, usually, not always, but I would say, large majority of times, that's the reality. Like I hope I would still be sensitive answering questions about people with disabilities, but I don't think that I would be, as much on the forefront if it was not affecting, my family and my kids. And, sometimes, who's building the schools for kids with disabilities? It's the wealthy parents that have kids, that have disabilities. Or who's the people that are fighting for a guna? Often it's people that have an guna experience themselves or in their family. Again, not exclusively, but sometimes, to be sufficiently motivated and to deeply understand the reality, it has to affect you personally. The goal of a rabbi is to, exercise his empathy muscle and to not need it to affect him personally for him to understand and to do the work to empathize, but it doesn't always happen. Here he is, he's writing this tshuva now in his old age. What, there was no blind people in his communities for the last 40 years? Why didn't he write this tshuva for the last 40 years? It had only until maybe he posted this way, but it wasn't until he affected him personally and deeply that he sufficiently, understanding and motivated to go ahead and write it. And so that's, I think, quite significant, and feels that also that doesn't invalidate him, that more positions him to understand and to have a voice, and it doesn't invalidate him and make him, not objective. At the end of the day, a halachic argument is going to be assessed by the strength of the argument, okay? But so just because he wants to get there doesn't mean that proves that he's right. So he is going to have to make the argument, and he basically feels comfortable saying that I want you to know why it's important, and and that does not invalidate me, and if anything, it more positions me to be making this argument. Okay.
Rabbi Linzer?
Yes.
That it's one of the things that I admire most about. I'm a big fan of Rav Avi, and that I don't think he has anybody in his family that is in wheelchairs, but that he made sure that the shul is totally accessible to the bima and from both the women's and men's section. I don't know if it's unique, but it's certainly very rare in almost any community to have it that accessible as he has had it, and then they have a variety of other things like that. So I always put in a plug if I can for Rav Avi, because he's so far ahead of the field here on many of these.
Absolutely. I want to say one other thing before moving on from this paragraph is this phrase of, I already mentioned the phrase of I don't count. I'm not amongst those that are numbered. But I also want to put this phrase, when you say Allah b'machshava, it means like, oh, I had a thought, like, oh, the Beis Yosef had this thought, and now I'm going to be excluded. I mean, he just got through telling us earlier that according to the Beis Yosef, he really assessed all of it, and he came to this conclusion after seriously weighing it. And I think that this is a little bit of a hidden critique, that you didn't think about it well enough. It was almost as if you just gave it a cursory thought, and it didn't affect you, and you didn't enough really give it the weight that it demanded. So I think that there's a critique there about just the way that's being framed. Okay, so now let's keep on going. And therefore, amarti v'gamarti b'libi. I said, and I sort of concluded in my heart. God forbid that I should abandon this tree of life and holding fast to its branches. I have loved this from the youth, from my very youth. This is what I love. The laws, the religion. I won't abandon it even as I grow old. And again, notice nobody's asking you to abandon Torah. You're the biggest posek and Talmud Chacham, and people ask you shaylas. And nevertheless, not getting an aliyah symbolically feels that I don't have a portion to the Torah. Look, I think I don't have to tell you that, going back, like a decade or two or three or whatever, when women first, Orthodox women had the opportunity to get an aliyah, or to go up and read from the Torah or whatever it was in women's tefillah groups, even before there were partnership minyanim. Women reported how they wept. That they finally felt that the Torah was relevant, was theirs as well. So, symbolic things can be pretty powerful. Okay? I will not abandon it. I will go in its path. And now I will open in the matter of halacha. Now that you've heard why this is so important, now let's get down to discussing the halacha. Okay? Lir'ot alma asali harav kacha. Why did the Beis Yosef do this to me? I want to understand what made him do this to me to tell me that I couldn't get an aliyah. So, of course, what's funny about this is that it's framed in such a first-person personal way. What made him do this to me? He didn't do it to you. He didn't even know you. You were born after he died. What do you mean, what made him do it to you? But the point is, when somebody is excluded, everything is personal. It's not that it's not personal. Like somebody will say, look, I'm sorry, it's not personal. We just don't have the budget. It's not personal. It's just our policy. It's like, no, that's personal. You're telling me your policy, your budget, your whatever is effectively not creating a space for me and telling me that I don't matter enough. That is personal. Okay. So I think, again, that saying when people are oblivious and how it's really being experienced in a way that feels very painful, very personally. I will lift up my eyes to the mountains, very interesting in terms of he's blind. He says, I'll lift up my eyes to the mountains. I actually once asked, a blind person, I said, is it problematic when people use like sight metaphors? Like if I were to say to you, do you see what I'm saying? Is that like a problem? And they said, and this person said, no, that's totally fine. The problem is when you use the negative, when you sort of say, oh, you're just blind to what this is. You just can't see, what I'm. So the negative, and that's at least this one person's experience. I don't know. Again, he doesn't speak for all blind people, but anyway. They say, I will go to fight God's war. I will prove my position. I will make it as clear as day. I will speak about your testimonies in front of kings, meaning great authorities like Yosef, and I will not be embarrassed. Okay, so then, as I said, he gives this whole thing. So, we're likely to think that, like I said, that he might not be very objective. But now he says, okay, now I'm going to prove it. And you can assess my argument based on my proofs. And what's actually interesting here is he does something that actually is rare. I don't know where this occurs in any other tshuva, where he says, I'm going to tell you the 3 ways you can come to halacha conclusions, right? Like, where do you ever see a posek say that? They just say, let me prove to you why I'm right. Okay, and here's what he says, and I'm just reading this because it's inherently interesting, but also because I think that after giving that extremely personal and moving opening, he now almost has to make the point, and now I'm going to show you how I'm going to do rigorous halacha. Let me read it and then I'll just reflect. Okay, now I'll come to the matter. Anybody who wants to pass in halacha and to come to a conclusion when there's a debate amongst the poskim, it has to do it in one of 3 ways. Number 1, I made the Aleph Bet Gimel, that wasn't in the original. Prove it from earlier sources, like just make a stronger argument based on the Gemara. We would say the Gemara and the Rishonim. Okay, number 2. Even if you can't prove it, if there's a general consensus, a majority of number and a majority of weight, not everybody counts with the same weight, then paskinan halacha kevasayu diachid barad halacha. We'll go like the consensus. So number 1, what does the Gemara seem to say? Number 2, where's the consensus? And we always also will give favor to what is the current practice over what to an earlier practice is. There's weight particularly to how halacha has evolved and what the current practice is. And then he says, and now I'm going to show you that on all 3 counts, I can prove why I'm right. Okay, so as I said, to some degree, I think he had to even frame it this way because, now that he showed his personal stake, he has to show that he's doing rigorous halacha. I do want to say, that we're doing these kola for psak that I mentioned. And when I talk to them, and also when I talked elsewhere about like what psak halacha is, I said that that normally we're sort of told that what a posek does is he comes to the material totally objectively, and he sees what the Gemara is saying, what it's saying, and from there he draws his conclusion. And I said, no, that is not what halacha, psak halacha is. That's what you do in the base medrash. Psak halacha is often you come. Not all the time. If you're asking me about like you have to kasher your pot, whatever, it's one thing. But when there's like a real deep human issue, you come to me and a posek will often come and say, if you have an intuition about like where the halacha has to go here, what the halacha should be. And then they want to see if they can get there. If you read a tshuva from Rav Moshe Feinstein, you pretty much at the outset can guess what answer he's trying to get to based on the nature of the circumstance. It's not 100% of the time, okay? And then he's going to see, can I now get there? Can I now prove it? So I said, well, if you acknowledge that a posek starts with an intuition and often a sensitivity to the human being in front of them, and they have to see where they're trying to get. So what makes it halacha? What doesn't make it just like, well, you pre-decided the conclusion? So I say the key is the word wants. Try. Okay, he's going to try to get to a conclusion. Sometimes say I tried as much as I could, but I have no legitimate way to get there. Okay, so that is what gives integrity to the process. But a real posek, the great poskim, Rav Moshe Feinstein, Rav Avad Yosef, they're trying to find an answer that works for this person, and 98% of the time they're able to get there. But there are 2% that they're not, and that is because the key word there is you try to get there, but then you have to argue it and defend it strongly and halachically. Okay, and that's what he says that he is about to do. Yes.
I thought it was the opposite is the case, that we say that the older the ruling is, the greater force it has.
Well, so that's what he's sort of trying to balance. It's a little bit of a game, not a game. It's a little unclear how you strike that balance. What he's sort of saying is like this, the early sources, the Gemara and Rishonim, those are the more authoritative ones in the sense that, your argument, the stronger your argument is based on the Gemara and the Rishonim and shows that is like the real shot that comes from them or the real whatever, then obviously that's key. Okay, but then we sort of recognize that halacha also has evolved, and over time, maybe different sensitivities have grown up, different consensuses have grown up. So when you're sort of looking, not in the Gemara Rishonim period, or let's sort of say like this, post the Shulchan Aruch period. So post the Shulchan Aruch period, where it's sort of like all of the canonized sources have already been canonized, Gemara, Rishonim, Rambam, Shulchan Aruch, and now it's the question of like how halacha is being paskined. So when it's the question of how it's being paskined, if something has developed into an accepted psak nowadays, that certainly gives it weight. I think that's basically what he is saying. Okay, but it's poskim use these are not rigorous. Poskim might use them in different ways. Okay, I want to now get to the end because I think this paragraph that's coming up is extremely powerful. Okay, so he says like this. I'll show you that in all three ways. Now I cut out the actual halachic argument, okay? And then he says, interesting, he says, incline. After these three ways, the evidence leans in that direction, inclines in that direction. And that's what we're going to do. He also throws in an amaretz because somebody who is illiterate also can't read from the Torah. Okay, so won't go into that right now. Now, he says that they are inclined that way. They don't say that they absolutely prove it. So a normal posek who does not have the sensitivity that Tova expressed earlier would say, okay, I see all your arguments. You're right. There's an inclination there's a weight in favor of saying that a blind person can an aliyah, but we should just play it safe. Safek brachas lahakel. If there's a question about making a bracha, we should not make a bracha. Let's be concerned about bracha levatala. Let's just play it safe and not give an aliyah. As long as it's not 100% clear, why not play it safe? And that you hear that all the time, right? Well, you're being so lenient and trying to be so sensitive. You got to be stronger about halacha, and it's not clear. You should be strict. So now he has an amazing paragraph that is a response to that. He says the following. He says, "Ot mihani, I'm astounded. Al divrei ha'osrim, those who would forbid. Dehechi chlitu hadin, how could they have come to the conclusion, lifrok o malchus shamayim me'al ha'anashim, to cast the yoke of heaven off of people? And especially in such a big and important mitzvah, this is not what the rabbis teach us. The rabbis, and then he goes to discuss like the importance of finding opportunities, for people. I'll get to that in a minute. But this is an amazing sentence because what's he saying here? He's saying it's like the best defense is a good offense. You say I'm being too big of a make-you. You're the one being the make-you. Like, I'm astounded how you could think to Paskin not to give an aliyah. Now, why is that in what way is that an unacceptable psak? So normally, what I would say is, before I get to what he says, they tell a famous story about Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, Rav Yosef Dov Soloveitchik's grandfather, that he was, he would be always like very ready to break Shabbos, even for like a small health issue. Like somebody got a cut, he would say like boil water or something like that. And he would say, don't say I am lenient about Shabbos. I am very, very strict about pikuach nefesh, about saving a life, and that is, I think, the ongoing like dynamic in halacha, that you have what I'll call the more ritual mitzvot, and then the ones that are more about people-oriented, saving a life. Somebody is sick. Do you have to fast on Tisha B'Av if you're pregnant, if you're this, if you're whatever? Somebody can't get an aliyah, okay? And normally, the way most people think is if you weigh in favor of the ritual ones, you might be not able to get an aliyah, Oh, you have to fast. That's the ritual. Maybe it's a bracha levatala. Then you're being strict. And what Reb Chaim Soloveitchik was saying is, no, maybe you need to be strict about the human issues, about the, about the kavod brios, about the person in pain, about the pikuach nefesh. The problem is that, while I fully agree with that, most people don't buy it. Like in terms of their deep way of thinking, this is a problem. I'm not agreeing with this. They feel like they know what Chumrah is. Chumrah is about being strict about the ritual stuff, not about the human stuff. So what he is doing that is so brilliant is he's sort of taking the game to them. And he is saying that even in your calculus, you are risking giving up so much more than you're gaining. You think you're gaining that you're going to save a bracha levatala. Maybe the tzibur won't have 7 aliyot. Let's play it safe. What are you risking? Even in the ritual realm, you are risking alienating people from Torah and mitzvos. Lifrok o malchus shamayim me'al ha'anashim. How are you poskening this way? You are casting the yoke of heaven off of their shoulders. You are pushing them away. And there's a real consequence of pushing them away. And if anybody who has kids with disabilities or knows people with kids with disabilities, you know how true this is. So many people feel, the shul was not accepting of my kids, did not make a place for my kids. Well, if they don't want me, then I don't want them, and to hell with it. And, and not only do they leave that shul and go to another shul, they leave a life of Torah and mitzvahs. What do I want with the Jewish community if this is how it treats me, right? This really, really happens. I know somebody very frum whose kid had muscular dystrophy and, Duchenne's muscular dystrophy, and could not find any place, for her kid, a shul. And she said when she would walk home from Shabbos, there would be this priest standing outside of the church and was very welcoming. And she said, part of me totally wanted to go there. They were welcoming. My shuls weren't welcoming. So I think that is so powerful. How can you risk what this is going to mean to be pushing people away, from this type of world of mitzvah? So, and I think that is so important to be thinking about when we are both what should be pushing us to be poskening appropriately, and also, how we respond to those who would be naysayers. Okay. So, yeah, I just want to
But I
skip to
just
the
say
end
something
here.
quickly, Rabbi
Please,
Linzer?
yes,
Rabbi
yes,
Linzer, I just want to say something very
please.
quickly. We don't realize how it affects other people until, God forbid, something happens to us. Okay. And,
Right.
it's almost like all of a sudden that it's what we were saying before, that sometimes since we don't have a disability, or our children don't have a disability, it's not important to us. And it's more difficult for us to be, I shouldn't say this, empathetic, but,
Right.
it turns around, things happen to us that, and, to our children or to us. And then we begin to see, oh my God, I was really,
Yeah. Exactly, exactly. And that goes back to what I'm saying, that sometimes, sadly, we need it to affect us before we really deeply internalize it. And that is a problem. And, that's why we do this week on disabilities. And we realized early on that more important than any other Torah we can teach them, or halacha we can teach them, is bringing in people that can tell their stories, people themselves, parents, whatever, because in the end, it really starts with the empathy, that is so key. Okay, so just to finish this, he says like this. He says it's interesting that one of the proofs he gives is that some of the Gemaras about how they would let women do certain things, like women could do smicha and korbanot, put their hands on a korban, for example, even though that halachically was not required, and there were some technical problems with it. And the reason is to allow women the opportunity to be more religiously fulfilled. Now, some people are not happy with that because they feel that that's like a little condescending. Oh, it'll make you feel nice. But what it's still saying is, and he feels, no, this is saying having people included, you might not always be able to include them in exactly this, this form or that form. But the overriding need that people should feel connected and included has to always be driving us. So he says like this, he says, even though there would have been some problems with them doing that, he's going to this issue about women and korbanot. I don't want to get into the details. Vitru chazal davar, they were willing to forego those problems. Mitam de kabbalas ol malchus shemayim adif tfein. It is more important. You see, there he doesn't use nachas ruach, which could be read in a negative, like a paternalistic way. He says, accepting the yoke of heaven, being more involved in a world of mitzvot, is more important. Mitam nachas ruach, and that's the nachas ruach we said. Okay. The im came, going to the last paragraph. Hu adinami b'nidon shel. The same is true in our case. Sheyesh levater l'amad shesum sheim b'chopi adam lo sefer prech. That we should let a literate person and a blind person get a bracha. That they should be accepting the yoke of heaven again, be included, involved, part of the world of Torah and mitzvot, and to have really that sensitivity about them. And then what I love is the sign off. He says, Ne'um binyamin Aaron, Avram Solonik Zal, so that's just his name. He says, because the entire community is holy. Now, who said Kikol Ha'ida Kulam Kedoshim? Anybody know?
Korach.
Korach. Thank you. Korach. Correct. And because we've been mentioning some of the women's issues along the way here, when the stuff about like 2 decades ago about it was, I think, I forget at this stage, it was women's tefillah groups or partnership minyanim, but at one stage Rav Schechter wrote this whole screen against it, and he basically quoted Korach, and he said it was Korach who said that everybody is equal, and what these women have to learn is that there's a hierarchy in Judaism. Kohen, Levi, Israel, man, and then woman, and you got to just learn that and whatever. So, what he
but he leaves the women out. That's the problem.
Right. Well, obviously, but what he says here is, he says no, Korach was right. Everybody is holy. Everybody does deserve to participate. He says, Korach was not saying something untrue. He was just a demagogue, and he was saying this thing in order for him to, be in charge and for him to get power. But the
Right.
actual claim that he was making, that everybody is holy and everybody deserves to have a part, he says that absolutely, is true. So I just think this tshuva is such a beautiful demonstration and articulation of what types of sensibilities, can be driving a posek, or need to be driving a posek in these areas, and what it means to really have a felt sense of, of exclusion and how that has to motivate us. Okay, so that's what we'll end for today. And next time, I think we'll look more at some specific models. Here was like one person's very passionate personal expression of it. We'll look next time at some halachic and Torah models. I think that will also strengthen this discussion.
Rabbi Linzer,
Okay.
could
Yes.
this Bert, could you please email this to me so that I could share this
Sure.
with people who are
Absolutely.
interested in from the group?
Absolutely.
Can I also say I think that Rabbi Weiss's cousin, Haviva Levy,
Yeah. Somebody put
had
that in
polio
the
as a child, and that certainly sensitized him to,
Right.
and she was a very religious woman, and she
Yeah.
actually married a blind person.
Right.
I know. Actually, he spoke at the
But-
yeshiva. But again, all of the things in life, hopefully sensitize us, but sadly, not everybody gets us, internalizes those things as much as everybody else.
Yes,
All
but
right, everybody. It was good learning with all of you. Okay.
thank you so
Okay,
much.
thank you.
Take care. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Linda.
Bye.
Thank you, Rabbi